Our talk today is LiveOps sucks, but it really doesn't have to. So I'd really like to ask the room, first of all, how many people are actually running LiveOps in a game right now? Okay, pretty good. How many people are thinking about running LiveOps in a game, but they're not doing it just yet? Planning. Okay, a few less. Okay, so back to that first group. Okay, out of all those that are running LiveOps right now, who's finding it super easy? Oh, that's the right answer. Well done. Thanks for that. Yeah, so about 15 years ago, I co-founded a mobile game studio, and we've grown that over the last 15 years. And we've had to transition from premium products through to free-to-play, now to games as services. And it used to be really easy. You used to make a game, you used to put it in a box, or you put it onto a store, and then you kind of forgot about it. And if the game was successful, you made lots of money. And if it wasn't, that was it, tough. You had to kind of go again. I think LiveOps has changed a huge amount of that. So I don't think it's particularly easy. If we look at the LiveOps landscape, when you're considering everything that's involved in running a game live these days, this is really kind of the tip of the iceberg. By the way, we've got lots of bullet points in the slides, so we'll stick it up on the website after this, so don't worry about taking pictures and stuff. There's loads, so from everything that's encompassed within your game, from account management to messaging and localization, actually your team, which is really important. Very few people talk about the development talent when we talk about LiveOps, to monetization, which Mark did a great job to cover just now, to customer service, app store management. Then we get into data, how you collect, store, and manage your data and get insights from data, server infrastructure, security and compliance. Wow, I'm tired even just talking about it already, right? Let alone doing it. And then as a studio, you're having to balance all of that against your resources. And none of us, I doubt, are really in a situation where we're Supercell or EA or Activision, where we've got unlimited resources to play with. So you've got time, you've got finance to deal with, and your talent as well. It's like your people, what are they capable of? What skills do I have in-house? And who can I hire? And that's really, really, really hard. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that SpaceApe actually said that 2/3 now of their revenue, over 2/3 of their revenue, comes directly from LiveOps. 2/3 of their revenue. So if you actually do want to make money out of your games business now, you have to take LiveOps very seriously. We have a very short time today, so we were kind of talking about what we were going to share. And Mike's very technical, he's our CTO, and he was wanting to go into a lot of detail about the technical side of LiveOps. And I said, no, let's talk about the high level stuff. This is the stuff that is very common sense that a lot of people forget or they miss out. These are the mistakes we see developers making like day in, day out. And we'll go through them and you think, oh gosh, no one makes these mistakes, but they do. And I've got some examples there that we'll share as well. So here's 5 things. The first thing is really interesting. You would never, ever, well, I would hope you would never, ever commit to development without first having a game design or at least a plan for your game. But you'll be amazed the amount of people that go into LiveOps, they start their launch and they haven't really made a plan of what they're going to do in LiveOps. And it's pretty obvious, but I think it's a point that's well worth making. The earlier you plan, obviously, the better. Define your own success criteria. As I said earlier, we're not Supercell, we're not Activision. Your studio is going to be unique. It's going to have a unique financing model. You can have certain aims and objectives that you want from your games. Set your success criteria that reflects what you need. Set your own KPIs, what you're aiming to target. Model various outcomes. No one knows the future. You don't know the future. I don't know the future. Your game might be a huge success. It might be a complete failure. The reality is it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. So if you can model various outcomes, you're prepared to deal with those outcomes later on. Setting cadence. People talk about cadence a lot in LiveOps. Set initial cadence for your LiveOps activities. You might be looking at, say, for example, content updates, right, which is a favorite one. And you might think, okay, we want to get to a place where we're doing a content update every Friday before the weekend, and then we'll have a sale on the old content over the weekend. Well, that's brilliant, but actually doing content every week is really difficult. It takes a lot of resources. So you might want to start just doing it once a month first, and then move to twice a month, and then move to weekly. Definitely factor in soft launch, okay? There's plenty of examples where developers have gone straight to global launch without a soft launch. Even fairly sophisticated, educated developers. We've seen situations where there's a lot of paid UA, there's TV ads, radio ads, print stuff going on, and the gameplay, the monetization, LiveOps, none of that is actually optimized at all. And obviously, if you do that, you're going to leave a significant amount of revenue on the table. You're going to have an increased churn rate in terms of your user base as well. So soft launch is really, really important. One takeaway, please do not leave here without thinking about this in future, is soft launch. The longer you can spend in soft launch, the better. Mike.
Cool. So our second point is avoid death by data. So a common error that we see is a lot of developers will just try and capture everything about their game without giving any thought about the kind of insights that they're trying to get from the data. So what that means is the game's been in soft launch for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. The developer says, okay, let's see how players are getting on at this particular piece of content, or how they're progressing through this part of the funnel. And it turns out they don't have the event data to give them those insights. And by that point, players have came into the game, they've churned, and that opportunity is over. So our advice is really to basically design your event data with the same care and attention that you would apply to your game design, because it's that important. So like I said, a common problem is not really thinking about what you're trying to do with the data. So we advise taking a bottom-up approach. So think about the kind of insights that you want to get and design your data around those insights. So if you're not sure where to start, first-time user experience is really important. So make sure you've got really good telemetry around that. Player progression, so how players are going through your game, how they're getting through various pinch points, how quickly they're accumulating premium currency, that's really important as well. And also monetization context, so what was a player doing before and after they monetized, not just the fact they monetized, what was the context around that, that's really important. You should also think about a telemetry specification. So this will be a document which describes in detail the event data that you're going to capture from your game, as well as the parameters that go along with each event. So ideally you'd have an analyst or a product manager, they would own this document, and it would also act as a communication tool between everybody in the team. So you don't get to situations where the analyst is trying to look at data from soft launch and he has to go to the developers to say, okay, well, what did we actually capture? What format is it? How do I work with it? If you have that written down, it's super clear to everybody in the team. The other thing that's really important that we see is people don't test their data. So the developer says, okay, I put in a telemetry around these things. We say, okay, that's fine. And again, they launch the game and it turns out that's not fine. Because once a player has churned from your game, the opportunity to capture data from them is gone. It's really important you make sure you get it right. So once you've got your telemetry in your game while it's in dev, test it, and also test it with your chosen analytics tools. So go through practice scenarios with a test build and make sure you can get the visualizations, or however you're planning to use that data, make sure you can get it out of what's been captured by the coder. Yeah, and the final point as well is that context is just as important as actions, like I said. So the player opened the store, that's great, but why did they open the store? What was their currency balance? What piece of content had they just played? All these things are probably more important, or just as important as the actual event. So yeah, a good example we saw, we had one customer that was trying to capture additional data inside each event. So they JSON encoded a whole bunch of stuff, thinking that was a good solution. But they never told the analyst on the team about that, and the game was out for about a month or so before anybody realized, and then it took a lot of extra effort for them to be able to visualize that data. So if there's a bit more communication there, if there's a telemetry spec, if somebody had actually taken the time to test the telemetry data, that would have been captured. So yeah, design your event data with care and attention, and treat it as just as important as any element of your game design.
Thanks, Mike. So in a previous life, I was a game designer, and most games kind of look a little bit like this, under the hood. All of the kind of great games that we play, when you're actually on the development team behind them, you realize that it's a mess quite often. So I think in a kind of chaotic development environment, it's quite important to remember, particularly when you consider LiveOps, is to consider what functionality needs to be built into the game for LiveOps right at the beginning. So starting from the very sort of basics of the server-client relationship, is the game going to be server authoritative? Is it going to be client authoritative? Figuring out, is it actually going to be a mix, is super important. I think it's going to inform a lot of decisions that you're going to make further down the line. If you make a bad decision quite early on, that can obviously impact if you then are unable to respond to the changes that require to be made in your game. Making a list, right? I love lists. My life is just lists. And maybe that's something that comes from being a game designer. But lists are really important. So list out all the things you think that you're going to want to change in real time once the game's actually live. Look at other games that are like your games. Most of the time we think we're kind of inventing things that are completely unique, but quite often in game development we're borrowing ideas from different people, and it's quite possible that your game's already got a similar game that it's already live. So look at what they're doing in terms of content update and features. What events are they running live? If someone's running an event in the UK every weekend, the 50% sale in your genre, well, that probably works pretty well for that style of game. So that's a really good place to start. It's going to save you a lot of time. Very important, obviously, we're a LiveOps toolset. integrate your tools before you need them. Don't leave it too late. We see this time and time again. Someone's just about to go to soft launch. Okay, we're going to integrate some tools. It doesn't give you any time to really learn how to use those tools, even the best tools in the world. And to be fair, game developers today, whether it's engines or LiveOps toolkits like PlayFab or like ChilliConnect, developers have got an incredible tool set to choose from. But ultimately, even the best tool in the world is completely useless if you don't use it well. So learn, read the documentation, figure out how to use it, and optimize it as well. I think we don't really talk very much about the team as well, and of course it's people that make games and it's people that run LiveOps team. You need to prepare them as well, and I think you're briefing them around what are the kind of common threats and opportunities that we're likely to see. Thinking ahead of the game's live, if there's a bug or there was a problem, how are we going to respond to that? I think we've seen numerous times where developers will have a serious bug within their game, and they think, okay, right, great, what we can do to help resolve this situation is we'll message the players and we'll gift them some free currency, and that's fantastic. There's mechanisms within Chili to support that, but ultimately if you haven't integrated that within your game, then you can't do it. And what that leads to is you rush out a quick release to fix that, and of course if you're rushing stuff in game development, it's just going to lead to more bugs and more problems. So don't leave it too late to integrate your tools.
Cool. So speaking of tools, you should choose your tools wisely.
I thought you were going to abuse me there.
Not this time. So anybody that's ran a live service game knows that the amount of tools or platforms that you need to integrate to do your job effectively is massive. It's overwhelming. So these are just a few. You'll typically have a game services platform like ChilliConnect to handle player accounts. You might have standalone analytics as well. Support, attribution, ads, social, and this is just a tiny fraction of the number of potential solutions that are available. So how do you find your way through this minefield? So yeah, it's easy to be overwhelmed. So our advice, as we sort of said in some of the previous slides, is to start simple, to start with what you know. Don't try and do everything at once because you've read some blog post on PocketGamer.biz about somebody that's running LiveOps in a game with tens of millions of players. What they're doing doesn't need to apply to your game with a couple of thousand players in soft launch. So keep it simple and don't feel that you need to know everything from day one. Focus on main KPIs, focus on some of the things that Paul spoke about in terms of support, some of the things that Mark spoke about in terms of your game loop and player retention, and just use the tools that you need for your initial soft launch phase, and don't worry about the later stages, that will come. So one thing that's worth mentioning as well is that often there's no best tool or platform. This is particularly true, I think, in analytics. I think because analytics tools have been out for well before sort of free-to-play took off in mobile. So it's this massive legacy of years and years worth of different analytics tools. So how do you pick the one that's right for you? One thing we see quite a lot is developers. Sorry, Paul just broke the stand. So developers like just trying to find the one that's most popular and not really fitting it to their team. So just as important as the tool is how well your team can use the tool and whether it fits with their skills and experience. So one really interesting lesson that we've had speaking to some people, we had a publisher that was using a really sophisticated analytics visualization tool, but it was purely web-based. It was about sort of building visualizations out your data without having to write any queries, which is great if you don't have anybody on your team with that kind of experience. But they actually had one data analyst who was quite comfortable writing queries. And in fact, all he wanted was access to his raw data. So that was a really kind of classic example where you've got a mismatched tool, which is great on the surface, and it's probably a great tool for a lot of people, but it didn't fit the team. So just as important as the tools you pick, is fitting them around the people that you've got in your team.
Thanks, Mike. I'll try not to destroy any more of the stage. So we're British. We're generally not very good at talking about money, but let's talk about money. Super important. Amazing the amount of developers that kind of go headlong into game development and LiveOps without thinking about what things cost. So I think probably given the fact that everyone's pretty much running LiveOps or about to run LiveOps, we all appreciate the value that it provides. Basically, if you want to run particularly a successful mobile game, these days you require a LiveOps strategy, and you're going to need some tools to be able to do that. You need to include the cost of those tools and the cost of the usage and running servers in your plan. As Mike said, actually understanding what actual LiveOps functionality you're going to need to support your game is super important. So it's probably another list, right? Lists are good. Get the costs for those tools very early on. Include them in your financial plan. Very important. A lot of tools, no names. You go to the website and there's no pricing on the website. That is a particular bugbear of mine. I think transparency is really important. It doesn't help developers. I've been in those shoes, trying to figure out, like, how much is this going to budget? How much am I going to have to budget for this? If the pricing isn't there straight away and clear, that's a problem. But there are plenty of solutions that will give you that. So make sure that you include that in your financial plan as soon as you can. I think having different options is really important, particularly when you're just starting out. You're not really quite sure, what I need, what tools am I going to need. Have a plan B as well, both for tools and for your resources. Certainly with Tag Games, the mobile game studio, we've had games that have absolutely blown us out of the water in terms of success, and we thought, wow, where's that come from? And there's plenty of games that we thought were surefire hits that just died a horrible, quick death. So having different options, I think, is really important in terms of how much you're going to spend on user acquisition, how much you're going to spend on your tools. Soft launch, we've kind of covered soft launch as well. I can't stress this enough. Soft launch is super important. Make sure you've got plenty of resources in place for an extended soft launch period. You don't know how long it's going to take. For some games, we've seen successful soft launches that last 3 months. We've seen soft launches drag on for years. We just don't know until you actually launch, you've got real data and real players, how long you're going to need to optimize your game. And the great thing is that once you're in soft launch, you can look at your LiveOps tools and look at the usage and how much you're using on the server. You extrapolate that out and get an idea of, like, once this is global, once we've got millions of players, this is how much it's going to cost. It's also a great time, of course, in soft launch to optimize your server integration. And again, we've seen a whole bunch of kind of crazy stuff that developers do when, again, they don't really understand the tools they're using, so they kind of do some crazy stuff. They're not doing best practice, and they end up spending a lot of money because the game's constantly pinging the server for no good reason. So I think this is something that we see time and time where folks start to look at LiveOps and they look at the cost on the website and they think, wow, this is going to be really expensive. I've got 20 million monthly active users. This is going to cost me tens of thousands. Well, actually it will, but it's a tiny fraction of your net income. And what we've seen both in Tag and at Chili over the last few years is that generally, if you're budgeting between 2 and 5% of your net revenue income to reinvest back into LiveOps tools and usage, that's generally a good kind of finger in the air kind of ballpark figure. So we're from Scotland, yay. So we don't have takeaways in Scotland, we have takeaways. And this is actually a real Chinese takeaway in Scotland. It's one of my favorites. So I've got five takeaways. Make a plan, okay, pretty obvious. Avoid death by data, figure out what data you need, and design your event data around that. Build in LiveOps early, so think about what you're going to need once you're in LiveOps. Don't leave it until you're in soft launch or even global launch before you start to integrate certain tools. Choose your tools wisely. There's a lot to choose from, some great tools out there, but just because it's expensive and it looks sexy doesn't mean to say it's what you need. And factor in the cost. Think about what it's going to cost. Build it into your budget early. That's us. Thank you very much for listening. We've got 1 minute 45 seconds left. ChilliConnect is by far the best LiveOps platform. It's born out of a game studio. We spun it out from a game studio 2 years ago. We understand your pain, and I think that's what makes us different from everyone else. We've been there. We know what it's like. It can be really horrible. It doesn't need to be. One of the great things about being with ChilliConnect now is that we get to help developers day in, day out, and we see great success. So if you'd like to talk to us, we're upstairs. Come and find us. We'd love to talk about your games and how we could help you.